So recently I rewatched Perfect Blue after sitting on this video idea for far too long. Actually, it happened twice since I forgot to write the script after the first watch. Either way, I remember watching this a while back and loving the confusing and indirect aspects of the story, but was really disappointed when I couldn't find any really good deep dives that tackled those narrative decisions. So, if you were anything like me, I'm going to break down all the interesting parts of the movie, including the more subtle stuff, and especially the later half of the movie where everything devolves into madness. And I spent hours going through every scene and frame in this movie, so you can trust me, this is going to be detailed. Either way, welcome to Perfect Blue. The beginning of the movie starts at an event for both acting and music. This portion of the movie will take a lot of time to fully explain, but bear with me as it's important for the rest of the movie. However, if you don't want to, I've set up chapters so you can skip between sections. Through the various discussions of people at the event, we learn about the female J-pop group Cham, which our main character Mima is the center of. Notably, there's a large emphasis on the parasocial aspects of the conversations, as many of them speak of her in a friendly way using honorifics such as Mimarin, or have become internet sleuths, finding as much information about her as possible and making judgments based on feelings. This introduction serves as foreshadowing for the rest of the movie as it will tackle the dangers of the film and idol industry, caused largely by the expectations placed on actresses/actors and idols by their fans and managers, as well as what can inevitably happen when our image becomes the epicenter for someone's delusions. After this introduction, Cham enters stage and begins their performance. Mima runs to the center of the stage, throwing her arms out in front of the audience, while the lights begin to blind everything on screen until the title of the movie appears. Opening to the title on this scene is very smart foreshadowing for what's to come at the end of the movie, as Mima's manager, blinded by her split personality version of Mima, takes the same position when staring into the headlights of an oncoming truck. Instead of continuing with the musical number of Mima and her group, we are instead brought back to Mima in her regular life. This is done to demonstrate the divide between Mima as an idol and Mima as a person. She still takes the train and still does the groceries, but on stage, she is Mima, the idol. Through incredibly well-crafted splices between her movements in her regular life and her dance number, we move between her and the present, back to the scene of her and her group dancing on stage, as well as prior conversation that took place before the event. These splices happen all throughout the movie and make for some of the best and most jarring transitions I've personally ever seen in anime. To avoid confusion though, I will just list these out in order from past to present to streamline all of the story points. Essentially, from past acting gigs, Mima has gained a reputation as someone with high potential for acting. Her idol, or main manager, Rumi, sees this as a conflict with her schedule as an idol, while her acting manager, Tadakoro, sees this as an opportunity she should not let slide. The two argue on behalf of what Mima truly wants, which feels incredibly distant considering Mima is seated directly in front of them. A beautiful scene illustrates this with the reflection of both of her managers on the glass behind her, each taking a different position to her side and visibly arguing right past her. Inevitably, Mima makes the decision to pursue her acting career, thereby relinquishing her position as a member of Cham. The next part of the timeline takes place at the event, as this was Mima's final performance as a member of Cham and was the event where she would make this announcement. However, just before this, we continue with the rest of her group performance, where there are some notable scenes. Amongst all the fans, we are introduced to one of our main antagonists, Mamoru, whose obsession with Mima will inevitably drive him mentally insane. In fact, we can already see a measurement of his sanity as he takes a security position for her event, and is seen holding his hand out, pretending like she is dancing in the palm of his hand. He even goes as far as to physically fight with riled-up fans on her behalf. Eventually, though, Mima makes her announcement and sings a tribute song ending the introduction of the movie and beginning the early movie credits while displaying the events leading up to the present. As she is about to enter her apartment, we get a flashback to when she was leaving the event and obtained a fan letter. Someone in the crowd screamed, "I'm always looking at Mima's room," causing her to quickly glance around her apartment entrance before entering. The scene spells the beginning of Mima's worries about her personal privacy and sanity. Exhausted from the events that happened during her day, she speaks to her fishes and then falls to her bed where she eventually looks at the posters of her and her group lying above her. As a final send-off to the idol version of herself, she packs these photos away and decides to open the fan letter she got from the event. However, amongst all of the sweet messages she got, the one letter she got before entering the car said, "I always like looking into Mima's room. I've set up a link to Mima's room." This of course worries her, but before she can put her thoughts into words or actions, she gets a call from her mom. Their phone call is nothing extraordinary. The mom mostly questions her decision to switch away from idol work. However, an interesting thing Mima mentions is that the pop idol image is suffocating, and she says, "Besides, nowadays pop idols are," before getting cut off by another caller. From what I could determine online, the last sentence is probably a reference to how public interest in Japanese idols was starting to decrease in the early 90s, largely in part to their attitude shifting amid Japan's economic crisis. Either way, when answering the other caller, she is met by silence, adding to the overall fear of being watched. Eventually, she ends the call to tend to her bath before getting a random fax by her window. When she checks what it is, she is frightened at the sight of the printed paper, as it is full of random symbols and words. As the sound of the fax becomes painfully loud, she stares out at the window and slams the curtains shut. Suddenly, we jump to the first scene she is acting in her show, where she says the words, "Who are you?" These are the only words that have been written for her acting gig, and this is expertly done to reflect the character she is acting to the earlier scene where she was wondering the same thing in the comfort of her own home. As she is practicing her lines, she asks Rumi about the letter mentioning Mima's room, which to her relief is apparently a link to an online website. This makes a lot of sense when you consider websites are also called home pages, so in this case it might be possible to read Mima's room as Mima's homepage. After the main actors in the show finish their lines, Mima is called up for her scene during one of the breaks between scenes. During this time, the lead director and writer come to deliver fan letters to the actors, including a letter for Mima. As a result, Tadakoro gets the opportunity to convince the director to give Mima more lines, which is perfect for the director as they were still finalizing the story's conclusion and needed a killer for their detective to find. They then pass on the fan letter to Mima's manager and call action for the scene to commence. Mima then says her line, "Who are you?" and instantly a loud explosion happens on set and Tadakoro is found lying bleeding on the floor. Mima's fan letter was rigged to explode on whoever opened it, and this was likely a ploy by Rumi to hurt either the director or Tadakoro for taking Mima out of idol work. In my opinion, Rumi probably hoped the director would open it, which is why she sent it directly to the studio. The result she hoped for would then be that the director is too afraid to give Mima a bigger role out of fear of his own security. Overall, this event adds to the fear and nerves plaguing Mima due to her feeling uncertain about pursuing acting and her safety from potential stalkers. We then return to Mima's home, where Rumi shows her how to use a computer to access the Mima's Room website. Apparently, they never called the police and simply took Tadakoro to the hospital. Eventually, Rumi leaves and Mima decides to access the website. To her dismay, the website is organized like a journal and lists everything she did during the day, including her own opinions. It goes as far as to list out what she bought from the grocery store and what she intended to use it for, what she did on her birthday with her friends, and even with the agency. It even has voice recordings, including her lines, "Who are you?" And as she continues to play those words in complete fear, the camera pans out to show the curtains getting blown in by the wind. Suddenly, we change perspectives as if we are someone staring at Mima through the window, just before flashing back to the set, where they begin to record her line. This is the second time this transition has occurred where the lines, "Who are you?" serve as a change between her acting world and the real world. These connections will only become more important in explaining the events in the later half of the movie. After Mima finishes her scene, we switch to a discussion between Mima's managers, as Mima was only given 3 total scenes in the show. Rumi argues that this was not worth leaving idol work for, while Tadakoro states that this would give Mima a chance to show that she is a capable actor. Rumi is obviously not content with this, as she believes Mima should become an idol, which is not surprising considering how deluded she becomes later in the movie. We then flash to a conversation in a bookstore where fans of Mima are talking about her acting gigs. One of them mentions that someone should save Mima, in which case we notice her stalker, Mamoru, standing right behind them. Although this scene happens quickly, it may be seen as the beginning of Mamoru's obsession with saving Mima from the acting world. Directly after this scene, we go back to following Mima in her daily life. However, things are more chaotic. At every corner, she feels the need to check if someone is watching her, and she even sprints from point to point to try to lose whoever could be following her. Nothing is a certainty for her, but she feels the need to be cautious out of fear. As she exits an underground subway, she stops to catch her breath. However, just before she moves, she notices a film store with her face plastered onto every scene at the store's entrance. She continues to move towards her company building, where fans begin to greet her. Eventually, Mamoru is the last one watching her as she enters the elevator and the doors shut. The way every scene is orchestrated to add to her unease of being watched is masterfully done, especially with how much she attempted to dodge her potential stalker just for the last person to be watching her to be that person. She then enters into her company building, where she immediately puts on a cheery and happy attitude despite her fear. Mima notices that Cham is celebrating and gets the news from Rumi that they made the top 100, something Rumi was made privy to during her earlier conversations with Tadakoro. Despite her happiness for her group members' successes, this only adds to her struggles as it makes her feel like she was holding them back, or at least is not relevant to the group anymore. Cham's manager escalates this, stating that the group is completely fine as a duo. Finally, Rumi lets Mima know she has been given more lines for the show. This leads us into the next major chapter of the story, where her acting career becomes the catalyst for an even deeper spiral into despair. The further Mima gets into her acting career, the more she begins to take roles that completely contradict who she is as a person and who she is as an idol. Just a warning for anyone uncomfortable with anything related to SA, this is your chance to skip this chapter of the video and move to the next. The most major shift in her acting career comes from the writers making an SA scene that is supposedly the moment that makes Mima's character in this show a killer. At this news, Mima's managers once more argue over letting Mima do the scene by arguing right past her. Tadakoro once more says we can't let the opportunity go by, saying it would mess with the show's management, while Rumi believes this to be completely insane. In the end, Mima says she will do it, leading to the inevitable and disturbing following scene. Although the entire scene is just being acted, which is demonstrated by the movie's harasser asking Mima if she is okay between takes, the entire scene is still too real. Acting doesn't make the scene less than what it is, and as an innocent idol entering the acting world, this moment is a huge breaking point for her. Mima becomes increasingly distant from herself during this scene, and Rumi runs off set crying. The following scenes show Mima in complete silence in her fitting room, barely moving a muscle while being plagued by her own thoughts. As soon as she leaves with Tadakoro, she puts on her happy attitude to disguise her emotions, and though Tadakoro feels the need to apologize to her, he caves to her attempts to act normal and just treats her to a meal. Rumi is also nowhere to be seen, as she did not want to stay to see what would happen to Mima. Furthermore, as Tadakoro and Mima leave, we see that Mamoru is just outside the studio, which means he likely saw everything that happened to Mima. Eventually, Mima gets home and continues to pretend everything is all fine. However, at the sight of her dead fishes, she breaks down crying and begins throwing things as she screams that she never wanted to do the scene at all. She only went through with it because she felt she couldn't disappoint all the people who worked so hard to get her to where she was. This obviously is a reference to the points brought up by Tadakoro in his earlier arguments with Rumi. These collective scenes are truly the movie's most painful and uncomfortable parts. In one of the most disturbing ways, we are shown how the pressures of the industry can corrupt someone and take away what makes them who they are. And for Mima, who already was stressed with so much, this serves as the ultimate trigger, propelling her descent into madness, and likely, even Rumi's. As Mima is crying on her bed, she begins to hallucinate a version of her Cham self on the screen of the computer. This hallucination makes fun of her and asks her if this is what she really wants. We then flash to Mamoru, who is revealed to be the writer of Mima's room. Instead of writing about Mima though, he is instead writing about the version of Mima that lives inside his head, who still wants to be an idol and hates acting. Mamoru, representing the crazed and obsessed fan, is desperately in his own delusion, trying to maintain the purity of his favorite idol, even if it means that he has to separate reality from his own canon. His room is plastered with photos of Mima as an idol, and he writes while listening to her old music. We are then greeted with many interviews where Mima speaks of the scene as a hurdle she wanted to jump to shed the image of a pop idol and be seen as an actor. We of course know this is only a facade, but this is the image that she chose to take in the public eye. In between these interviews, we even get conversations from Cham fans talking about how Mima's fans are probably losing their mind and saying that it's not their Mima. At this moment, we once more find Mamoru, who seems to be ripping up magazines with Mima in them. We then turn back to Mima, who is scrolling through her website at her house. While reading what Mamoru wrote about her, she immediately disagrees with it, but once more, her hallucination appears on her computer screen. She then has a conversation with her hallucination, which serves as a way of fighting with her own emotions and thoughts that she tries to keep locked away. Her hallucination tells her that the quote-unquote real Mima is writing the website, the one who still is an idol like the real Mima really wants to be. When Mima tells her hallucination that she wants to be an actor, her hallucination agrees and calls her filthy, saying that nobody would want an idol with a tarnished reputation. However, this time, her hallucination comes out of the computer screen, becomes part of her reality, and tells her that she will be taking her place. Additionally, she once more calls her filthy and tarnished before escaping past her curtains and out of the window of Mima's home. The window has always been used to demonstrate Mima's fear of someone outside of her home looking in, but at this moment it's used to demonstrate someone who's already inside but is escaping, which I take as a sign that Mima's fully possessed by the fear and pain which was once a distant threat. The following scene is the first death in the movie. The director, who wrote in the SA scene, is making his way to his company building later at night. As he goes to his underground parking lot, he notices someone has plastered the title of his show along the wall behind his parking spot. They have even gone to the extent of splattering fake blood along the wall. If this wasn't scary enough, the music from the intro of the show suddenly begins to play in the underground parking lot. Although it was written as a love song, it now takes a completely different context in this situation. with lines such as "The angel of love smiles at you. Can you see the angel's white wings? Her eyes gazing at you, her sweet voice, her gentle hands, and she is here just for you." It no longer is a song talking about love, but rather a warning of immediate and imminent death. As the director goes to open the elevator, he looks around in fear as the music gets louder and louder. Suddenly, the elevator door opens, and the music begins to blast from within, the director visibly afraid. We then see the elevator start to make its way up the building, but when it stops, the music is gone. All that is left is the lifeless body of the director, as both of his eyes have been gouged out. The scene has been masterfully crafted by first creating the song to have a double meaning and then using it to create suspense and foreshadowing for the director's death. The important question, though, is who was the one who committed the murder. Based on later scenes related to the second death, it makes it seem like this was one done by Rumi. However, I believe this one was done by Mamoru for a couple of reasons. First, he has been shown over the course of the last couple of important scenes, visibly frustrated by Mima's switch to acting, and was even there during the essay scene. Additionally, the song that was playing in the background as he was writing on the Mima's Room website in an earlier scene was the same one that was used in the director's killing. Lastly, the use of art through the bloody sign at the director's parking spot and the twisted use of the lyrics of the Champ song feel like something that is more likely to be used by an avid fan who has listened to it enough to understand it could be used in such a way. Following the events of the death, the story picks up at another music festival where some of Champ's fans are talking about the killing. At that same moment, we have another hint at it being Mamoru as he enters in the scene almost as if they were speaking about him. Finally, the story switches to Mima hearing about the news, which she is afraid of, as she notices the potential connection between this event and the letter bomb. Tadakoro tells her not to worry and that she should smile because that's what an actor should do. Unfortunately, when she turns to the window to practice smiling, she once more sees her hallucination, which tells her, "Serves you right." The scenes that follow this one directly connect into the second killing. As part of another acting gig to gain media attention, Mima goes to get photography done for a magazine. The issue, though, is that the photographer often takes nude photos and asks his models to remove their clothing. Before the photo shoot takes place, Mima is seen in the fitting room, hesitant to commit to the gig. Todokoro is once more telling her that everyone is waiting for her, which only helps to guilt trip her into going through with it against her conscience. In the fitting room, she is once more confronted by the hallucination of her idol self, telling her that no one wants her to be an actor and that she is going to perform with Cham on the stage in her place. We then see Mamoru staring up at the stage of the festival, imagining the idol version of Mima at the center of the group. A key takeaway is that the song that is being sung at the festival has lines like, "I want to stay the way I am forever. I'm fine even if I'm alone. I have finally found a luxurious loneliness." These lines are clearly references to Mima's current state of mind, even if they were not directly written in the context of Cham for that purpose. Inevitably, Mima goes through with all of the photographer's requests and once more spirals deeper into her own insanity and sadness. We are then brought back to Mamoru, who seems to be buying up all the magazines with Mima's photos to destroy them and maintain Mima's idol purity. In his room, he is seen writing on the website. The photos on his walls, including the hallucination version of Idol Mima, are seen speaking to him and giving him the information he inevitably writes about. However, from an email on his computer and later events in the story, we can determine that this is actually Rumi communicating with him and feeding into his delusions. Rumi, in her own delusion, wants to take Mima's place and believes her to be a hindrance, so she pushes Mamoru towards eliminating the real Mima. Whether this is more recent or has become a regular occurrence is hard to know. After this scene, we return back to the set where Mima is recording an outdoor scene with one of the main stars named Eri. Once more, the show that Mima is acting in is used as a representation of her actual self and what is troubling her. Or at least, in this case, it's more of a foreshadowing of what is going to trouble her. Specifically, Mima speaks about not knowing herself and being scared, while alluding to a split personality doing things in her place, and Eri mentions illusions. As later scenes in the movie makes Mima call into question whether she's the killer, this scene serves as a great introduction to all the confusion that happens later. Just as they finish up the scene, Mima sees Mamoru watching her on set, and gets scared, causing them to cut and reset the scene. This occurs as Eri mentions the illusions can't really come to life, which can be seen as a nod to the fact that the killings are not actually being done by Mima, but rather by her stalker. The scene that follows this one is made to appear as if it directly follows the last, however, it is later revealed to actually be a dream. Considering we jump from the set to this scene, it is likely that Mima went home after wrapping up on set and fell asleep soon after. I don't think the actual acting that happened on set is part of the dream, as later scenes, which I will mention, allude to this scene taking place in reality. As for the contents of the dream, Mima goes to visit her old Cham members with Tadakoro as they are recording a podcast episode. But when she finally gets into the studio, she sees the idle version of herself sitting in the room with her old members. As usual, the hallucination mocks and laughs at Mima just before running away. Mima gives chase out of the building and onto the streets, but is stopped after getting hit by a truck that is being driven by Mamoru. From what we already know, it appears as if everything that is part of the dream is, in one way or another, aspects that plague Mima's current mental health. Of course, after getting hit by the truck in her dream, she wakes up just in time for Rumi, who comes knocking at her door. The conversation that follows between Rumi and Mima discusses the contents on the Mima homepage. Throughout Perfect Blue, it's impossible to determine whether Rumi is aware of her delusions or simply switching personalities at random. For this reason, the scene could be an aspect of the sinister plot devised by Rumi, and she wants to know if her harassment has reached Mima. What is close to certain, though, is that the memories between both of Rumi's personalities are linked to some extent, so this conversation could also be viewed as a subconscious interrogation of Mima's mental health, or at least will serve against Mima rather than actually being helpful like Rumi may intend. Either way, the conversation has Mima question whether the Mima from the website is more like herself than the Mima she displays in the real world. She even uses phrases that were originally used by her hallucination, like, "my other self that I buried deep within my heart." She even goes as far as to say, what if the other personality started acting on its own? At this point, you may have noticed that the conversation starts to mimic the dialogue from the show, where Mima acts as the character who has a split personality. This is done to merge the two scenes together, causing a sudden jump to the set where Mima is actually in the process of acting for the show. As some might believe, this doesn't necessarily mean that one or the other scene is fabricated in her head. I would say it is more likely that the sync between her reality and the show, along with her damaged mental state, has caused her to drift in and out of thought and thus be less present in reality. Of course, because she had drifted back into the conversation between her and Rumi the night before, she messes up the take on set. Her co-star even says that she feels like she is going to have nightmares about this line, hinting that they have filmed the same scene quite a few times already. Before they start filming again, Mima once more sees Mamoru on set, causing her to jump out of fear. Also, just like before, he suddenly vanishes when she looks back to where he was. Following this scene, we have the first big jump cut where the screen flashes white and we hear the director say, "Alright, take 2. This is where things get really confusing because everything that happens after this mimics the time she wakes up from her dream where she got hit by the truck. In fact, they even run the same animations along with the same background news coverage that is saying the same thing as last time. This is why there was so much emphasis on the words take 2, because it's almost like Mima is repeating the same day. Of course, this is once more a reflection of Mima's mental state, as the movie is progressively getting more confusing or choppy as Mima is becoming less aware of reality. Once more, Rumi visits, and they have another conversation. Mima says it's been a while since they last spoke, which is a callback to the day before, at which point Rumi says that she visited just yesterday. Mima asks if the meeting was real, just before stressing out and breaking her teacup in her hands. Rumi immediately jumps to ask Mima if she is okay, however, almost oblivious to the pain, Mima simply asks, "Is this blood even real?" I would say that at this point Mima has definitely hit her breaking point, as she no longer seems to be able to remember what is happening in her daily life. We even get a couple of scenes where she begins reading from the Mima's Room website in order for her to know what she did that day. During the scene where she is reading from the website, there's also a symbolic reference to the scene where Mamoru is in his room writing information on the website. Both of them were surrounded by darkness in their room, with the only light coming from their computer. Considering the scene with Mamoru had him accepting his delusions and writing about a fantasy version of Mima who is still an idol, we could consider this scene a parallel as Mima accepting her delusions and believing that the Mima from the website is really who she is. We then flash to a scene from a recent episode of the show where the detectives are discussing Mima's character. In this discussion, we figure out that Mima's character had created an illusion of a murderer, which then became her second personality. It would then possess her and delete people she no longer had any use for. At this point, we notice that this scene is actually being watched by the photographer in the comfort of his own home, and is interrupted by the ring of a doorbell. When he goes to answer the door, he is greeted by a pizza delivery person, and as he is paying for his pizza, he is attacked. The attacker first stabs him in the eye, then the stomach, and finally the groin, which the attacker likely targeted because of the nature of his photography. The photographer, of course, tries to run and call for help, but no matter what he does, he keeps getting hit. Eventually, he is killed in front of the screen where he was watching the show, and similar to other parts in the movie, the show reflects reality by showing a scene where Mima's character killed somebody. This is a great representation of how the show and reality parallel each other, as they both are plastered across the same wall, doing the exact same thing. Suddenly, the hat on the pizza delivery person falls off, and we see that the person underneath is Mima. We then get a bunch of flashbacks of Mima's time being photographed, which is supposed to show that the attack is some form of retaliation for the trauma that was inflicted upon her. Unfortunately, I think, and it is a common theory, that this is simply misdirection and the real attacker is Rumi. As later scenes will demonstrate, Rumi's delusions make her think that she is Mima, and at times in the finale of the movie, she will look exactly like Mima unless viewed through a mirror. This is not some supernatural twist where Rumi turns out to be a vampire or something, but rather a stylistic design by the director to demonstrate that Rumi is mimicking Mima to the extent that she has nearly or practically become her. Because of this, Rumi can mimic the emotions that Mima felt during the photo shoot and also visually look like her when consumed by her delusions. It is also possible that this attack happened so long after the photo shoot because Rumi has only recently visited Mima and seen the state she was in. Assuming she empathized and subsequently internalized Mima's feelings, this could have driven her split personality to attack the photographer. I would also like to mention that a later scene in the movie has Mima ask Mamoru if he was the one who deleted the producer and photographer, at which point he only says, "and you'll be next." This could be implied as him agreeing that he was the one who did it, and some dialogue such as the photographer saying that the pizza delivery person was a strange guy rather than a girl could hint at it. Also, Mamoru is the only other person who might be able to mimic the emotions of Mima in that attack, as he pretty much acts like her online every single day. Unfortunately, it is never concretely agreed upon, so I'll leave you guys to decide on which explanation you like best. Either way, the attack becomes more and more gruesome, just until the screen flashes white once more, and we hear the director say, "Alright, take 3. Just like the last 2 times, Mima wakes up in her room, however this time it is the morning. As soon as she wakes up, she starts staring at her hands, which is made to seem as though she is questioning what she has done. Although this makes it seem likely that she thinks she attacked the photographer, there's no dialogue or concrete proof to actually trust that. In my opinion, she is constantly lost in thought and has shown that she is not always aware of reality, going so far as to trust the website to know what she has done throughout the day, so it is likely she has events confused. We know she smashed a teacup in her hand, causing her hands to bleed not too long ago, which she hadn't really acknowledged at the time it happened. Thus I would consider her looking at her hands and moving them as more of a sign that she is trying to determine if that was real. Additionally, she may remember the blood on her hands without remembering that it was hers and self-inflicted. Throw that memory in with a recent death that was related to Mima, and it can create a lot of self-doubt as to her involvement in the crime. Additionally, after getting an urgent call from Tadakoro, where she learns about the photographer's death, she quickly goes to her closet to dress up, at which point she finds the clothing that was used when the photographer was killed. We know that Rumi has been visiting Mima recently, and had visited the night before, so it's not impossible that she planted the clothing in Mima's room while Mima was lost in thought. Lastly, and I think the greatest proof it wasn't Mima, was the bag that the clothing was in. A couple of scenes back, when Mima was reading the information from Mima's room to try to figure out what she has done during the day, she says, "I guess I went to Harajuku," as we see her look at photos when she is holding that bag. Knowing that the site is practically run by Mamoru and Rumi, and symbolically represents lies and deceit, or at least it represents a fabrication of Mima's life, I think the emphasis on the bag is to hint that its contents are subject to scrutiny and should be questioned rather than accepted. Plus, from a more personal perspective, I would say that an item that's been publicly posted online would make for a really good way to plant evidence that is less likely to be questioned. With all of this information and her constant confusion about reality, these events alone would likely cause her to believe she was the perpetrator. After stressing out and contemplating reality, Mima rushes to the open door, at which reporters quickly attack her with questions regarding the crime. As the lights of the camera flash, we then transition back to the set where Mima, while sitting with Rumi, can hear everyone talking about whether she is a jinx. Some even go as far as to question who else might be attacked and is related to Mima in some shape or form. Rumi just tells her to not pay attention to it, but Mima just responds with more existential questions in her confusion with reality. Eventually, she is called up to act in a scene where she deletes someone with the same weapon used to attack the photographer, and is instructed to breathe heavily for the scene. Unfortunately, as she begins to hyperventilate for the scene, she begins to see the photographer's face in the actor, causing her to get scared and seemingly pass out. As this happens, the screen goes white one more time, but this time the director screams, "Action." The movie then shows Mima wake up in her bed like the last 3 times, but this time it is just another aspect of Mima's delusions. As she gets up and looks around, she is asked by her co-stars if she is awake, at which point the camera pans and it seems as if she is being questioned in an interrogation room. In reality, what happened is that Mima passed out as part of the scene and wakes up as part of the following scene where the detectives have caught her after her crime. Mima is then asked a series of questions about her name, what she does, etc. After the questions are finished, the detectives chat about the state of her mind and how she has dissociative identity disorder. The big twist is that all of the information provided by Mima and discussed by the actors are talking about real-world Mima. The scene makes it out to be that the whole movie we have been watching this whole time was one big fabrication by Mima, and in reality, she was not an actor for a crime drama, but a criminal committing real crimes in reality. Except the only issue with that is that this is all just happening in Mima's head and is actually not how the scene plays out at all. When the tape is played back in the recording room, it has a completely different dialogue and responses that do not have any relation to actual Mima. The scene plays out how it was written in the script, and they get their final cut. At this point, everyone begins to clap and cheer, and Mima is congratulated for her work. However, she is just confused and looking around at everyone unsure of what happened. This is because she is still lost and unaware of what is reality. After wrapping up on set, Mima and her managers have a couple more conversations, and then Rumi tells Mima to go get changed. On her way to the dressing room, she bumps into her co-star and calls her by her name in the show, at which point the actor corrects Mima and tells her that they are no longer acting. She even tells her that she should stop dreaming soon. This conversation is one of the more clear connections for what is reality and what isn't, and especially is a good demonstration of how lost Mima is. Unfortunately, while Mima is alone and walking back to the dressing room, she is attacked by Mamoru. In his attack against Mima, he brings her all the way to the set where the club scene was filmed and intends to recreate the scene, but this time in reality. At this point, Mima ends up using her "who are you" line, bringing a conclusion to it, and actually using it this time against the actual person who has been stalking her this whole time. Mamoru says he is protecting Mima, and when Mima says that she is the real Mima, he tells her that she is wrong because he spoke to the real Mima and she knows who he is. This of course is alluding to his conversation with Rumi as she pretended to be Mima. He then says that the real Mima, which is Rumi, says that Mima keeps getting in her way and so he intends to get rid of her. The rest of this scene plays out as an action scene where Mima continues to run and dodge Mamoru's attacks, while Mamoru keeps trying to get a hold of her. When Mima finally seems to get caught, she grabs hold of a hammer and hits Mamoru in the eye. He then gets up and begins to cry before passing out in the same spot as the earlier scene Mima filmed in the show. Mima then stands up to see if he is dead, at which she gets a flashback to the acted scene because of how similar the events were to the show. After gathering herself and leaving the room, Rumi finds Mima walking the halls with ripped up clothing. Rumi then helps her get to the dressing room, and after Mima has changed clothing, they both go back to the set from the club. However, when they get there, Mamoru is gone, and the set has been returned to normal. Rumi asks her if she is sure that she wasn't dreaming, and then takes her back to her car. As Rumi was aware and part of the plan devised by Mamoru to remove Mima, it can be assumed that the set being returned to normal, as well as Mamoru's body going missing, is something she could have done while Mima was changing, or before she met up with her in the hallway. As Rumi is driving Mima home, Mima passes out and only wakes up once she is at her place. As soon as Mima wakes up, she asks Rumi if she is there, to which she responds that she is in the kitchen, and then Mima calls Tadakoro to let him know about what happened. At first, this all seems normal, except there are a couple of key signs to show that something is off before the phone call ever happens. For starters, the room is far too tidy. After every major cut where the screen flashed to white, the director made it a rule to show us the entirety of Mima's room. As a result, it was pretty clear that as Mima's mental state started to deteriorate, so did her room. Additionally, the design of the room is very similar, if not exactly the same as Mima's room at the beginning of the movie. Since we know that Rumi's delusion is that she is the idol version of Mima, then the room seeming identical to Mima's when she was still an idol makes a lot of sense. Lastly, and probably the biggest hint, is that there are fish in the fish tank. We know that Mima's fish have died as it happened pretty early on in the movie, and the director had even positioned many scenes so that we are reminded that her fish tank is left empty. In fact, in the scene where she passes out on set and wakes up in what she believes to be her bed, we immediately see her reflection in the empty tank as soon as she sits up. So without any doubt, before the call even takes place, we know that this is not Mima's room. Despite trying to call Tadakoro, Mima cannot reach him. It's at this point that we, the audience, are made aware that Tadakoro and Mamoru have both been taken to the back of the set and taken out. As I mentioned before, this is probably what Rumi did before or after helping Mima get to her dressing room. After the call doesn't go through, Mima looks up at the tank and immediately becomes suspicious when she notices that the fish are in there. These suspicions are fed even further when she notices the Cham poster on the wall, which was the same one she took down as soon as she quit idol work. What eventually solidifies her suspicions, though, is when she looks out the window and realizes that the view is completely different from her actual room. At this point, we get the big reveal that Rumi has become delusional and thinks she is the idol version of Mima. Mima tries to ask her what is happening, but Rumi simply replies in her persona of Mima. Additionally, Rumi officially reveals that she was in contact with Mamoru and got him to attack Mima in the first place. Despite Mima's pleas, Rumi still intends to get rid of Mima and begins attacking her with the same weapon she used in the previous deaths in the TV show. Mima attempts to avoid Rumi's attacks, but is inevitably pinned down and wounded in her shoulder. After managing to kick Rumi off of her, she runs to the balcony where she attempts to make her escape. Unfortunately, there's no safe place to drop to, so she tries to scale across the building to escape Rumi's reach. While frantically making her way around the building, Rumi manages to knock her off her feet, causing her to slip and hang off the ledge of the balcony. With no other options, Mima launches herself off the balcony to the roof of the closest building, sustaining injuries from the height of the fall. However, this is not enough to stop Rumi. Rumi continues to chase Mima, now personified as Idol Mima, leaping and flying through the sky. As the chase continues, Mima manages to disarm Rumi of her weapon, only for Rumi to find an umbrella along the entrance of the door to a roof. Mima continues to run, calling for help, and even pleading for Rumi to stop what she was doing, but nothing works. They eventually fall from a platform on the roof to a garbage dump in an alleyway. Mima continues to run, but still, Rumi persists. Except this time, we see Rumi in the mirror, and unlike her angelic idol persona, we see that she is exhausted and struggling to keep up with Mima. As Mima approaches the corner of an alleyway, she sustains another wound to her lower back. Rumi attacks her again, misses, and destroys the glass of a building. Finally, Rumi grabs a hold of Mima and says that it's time to end all of this. However, lucky for Mima, she rips off the wig that Rumi was wearing. This shatters Rumi's image of Mima, causing her to frantically chase her wig as it gets blown into the wind. Without a care for her well-being, she reaches into the broken window and sustains a massive injury into her stomach from the broken glass. This causes her to scream and run in pain until she is in the middle of the road. Despite falling and being in serious pain, she refastens back on the wig and gives a sinister smile to Mima, making for one of the most memorable scenes in this movie. Just as she does this, a truck begins to emerge on the same lane that she fell on. Rumi sees the shining headlights and in her delusions, imagines a crowd applauding her for her performance. She stands up and gives a bow identical to the one done by Mima in the opening act of the movie. Luckily for Rumi, Mima jumps into the road, pushing her out of the way of the truck and saving her life. Of course, the truck driver responds to this by getting out of the vehicle and calling the cops and medics to save both Rumi and Mima. After all of this chaos, the movie goes nearly silent, showing Mima observing her surroundings just before the camera pans up into the sky and the sirens begin to be heard in the distance. We then flash forward to the future, where Mima, who now seems to be a distinguished actor, is visiting Rumi at a psychiatric ward. Through a conversation with the doctor, we learn that Rumi has been consumed by her Mima persona, only becoming Rumi every now and then. Despite everything Rumi has done to Mima, she still holds a place in her heart, saying that it is because of Rumi that she is who she is today. We then get a scene where Rumi looks into the mirror and sees herself as Mima, demonstrating how she has succumbed to her delusions. Finally, Mima gets into a car to leave the hospital, stares into her front mirror, smiles, and says, "No, I'm real," bringing an end to both the story and her mental anguish. Although this last couple of scenes seem relatively simple, there are still a couple of important details that can be overlooked. When Rumi looks into the mirror in the psychiatric ward, she is essentially mimicking the scene from the TV show Mima acted in, Double Bind, where Mima looks into the mirror accepting who she expressed herself as in her delusions. Further, compared to the scene where she attacked Mima, we now see Rumi in reality and Mima in the mirror, rather than the other way around. This once more represents that the Mima personality has taken control over Rumi. Additionally, I mentioned the importance of lighting in a couple of scenes in the movie, but did not fully explain it. Everything in the movie that is related to some type of delusion or distancing from reality is shrouded or glowing in a bright white. We have Mamoru in the dark staring into the bright white light of his computer, and Mima, after losing touch with reality, does the same thing on her computer. Further, the hallucinations of Mima as well as the appearance of Rumi when acting as Mima is always glowing in a bright white color. Now, in the conclusion, when Rumi stares into the mirror, we see the mirror reflect back in a bright white, essentially representing that she is consumed by her delusions. However, when Mima gets into her car and looks into her mirror, we see that the bright light is behind her. Thus, Mima's statement that she is real, along with the symbolism of delusions or fantasy being put behind her, demonstrates that she has finally found her identity and is no longer suffering from the turmoil brought by her career shift and Rumi. Despite everything I just said, there's also another way of interpreting the "I am real" statement. Essentially a double entendre. As she says the line and looks into the mirror, she breaks the fourth wall, staring directly into the camera or audience. This is to bring focus to the fact that none of this is in fact real. Every part of the story is fantasy, and we, in reality, are the ones looking in. Mima doesn't exist and never will. Considering the movie tackles the way the media industry, or at least media in general, can destroy people by making them more and more distant from reality, this statement can also be seen as a warning to bring us back into reality. If we obsess over things that are not real and are pure fantasy, then we threaten our lives with the potential of spiraling into chaos similar to Mima. And I guess for people like me and you, who are obsessed enough about an unreal story to write a video on it, or at least listen to one, are the first people this movie is talking about. Either way, that is my best understanding of the movie, and if you made it all the way to the end, then I really appreciate it. This video took a lot of time to put together, so I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like, leave a comment, or subscribe. Overall, I think Perfect Blue is one of the few true masterpieces in anime, and for that reason, I gave it a 10 out of 10. Not only is the story amazingly crafted despite deviating so heavily from the source material, but it also uses very creative editing and transitions to navigate between reality, whether that be past, present, or future, and fantasy. Additionally, the endless amounts of symbolism and details present in every scene makes it a new experience every time you rewatch it, since many of the details are very easy to miss on a first watch. Furthermore, the depth of the film's commentary on the negative effects of media on celebrities and consumers is fascinating and truly well written. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Here's a link to my first video where I did a detailed analysis of Elfenlied. Once more, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.